Walking down memory lane.
Walking down memory lane.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, yeah, I do remember.
This was in Dublin,
Yeah.
2011.
Yeah.
And I approached you and we were talking about cultural trap. And here are some pictures. So I'm telling you, do you know about the cultural trap? It is when Hans beats his wife, he is a perpetrator. And when Muhammad beats his wife, it is tradition. And you said, yes, you are right. And after that, 2011. And then I have some more pictures.
Oh, I love this picture.
2015 in Köln. Yes, here Michael Nugent, Igwe.
Yeah.
And yeah, these were the times.
Yeah. Oh gosh. And then there's one of us, we're all holding our hands up. Do you remember that picture? Of
course. I think it is the second one.
Yeah, this is it. Yeah.
The feminist humanists, the women.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is great.
Oh, I love this one. This was such a good event.
Yes, this was such a good event. This was in Köln, Cologne, in Germany in 2015. Yes. Yeah. But we have something else. We have something that many of our participants today will also like. This was in Belgrade, 2017. 2017, here we are again. It is the Women in Black. They made a conference. And here are some pictures. Lepa and you, Miloš and Maryam and me in Belgrade in 2017. And the last one is from 2019 when we were in Warsaw. Yes, yes, this is. So,
wow, that's many years, isn't it? That's lovely.
Yes, it is. I thought it is 12 years that we know each other.
Yeah.
And it is great that you are tonight here.
It's great that we're still here, both of us.
And I remember very good in Dublin, when the Islamists came and they wanted to explain to you, to mansplain, to, I don't know how to say, to Islamoplain. That Sharia law is a very good law and it should be spread all over the world.
Yeah.
And it was so great when you said to them, sit, shut up, now I'm talking.
Yeah, get used to women talking and you being quiet for a change.
Yes, it was great. It was good. So, Maryam, thank you for coming tonight here. I will be now muting myself and Nina will take the part of the speaker.
Thank you, Nada.
Thank you, Nada. I thought the photos were really lovely and it's so great that you two know each other for so long. So just a quick introduction on this whole series. The title is Brave Women 2022. And we will be portraying and hosting conversations with many women who we consider very important in our feminism and humanism as well. So the two previous conversations were with Caroline Forrest and with Gail Dines, and they're available on Center for Civil Courage's YouTube channel. Today's brave woman is Maryam Namazie, and she will introduce herself in more detail in just a little while and tell us more about her organizations and how they came to be. She will also speak to us about women in Quran and in Islamic countries more broadly. Then she'll tell us more about the relationship between the left and Islam in the UK as well as elsewhere. And finally, she'll give us a couple of points about cultural relativism in relation to violence against women and how exactly to fight against excusing such violence on religious grounds. This will be a very laid back conversation, not a PowerPoint presentation as it was with Dr. Dines. But yeah, Maryam, the Zoom floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much to both of you for having me here. I'm really glad to be here amongst such great feminists, and also especially Nada, and with this long history of activism that we've had together. Today, I actually wanted to speak to you about blasphemous women, but I think a lot of the topics that you mentioned will be addressed, but also I'm sure it'll come up in the questions and answers and comments that our friends here today might have. I mean, I guess I would like to hear a lot from those who are in the room. So I think, please do feel free to give your comments and not just necessarily ask questions. But maybe just to start off the conversation, I wanted to talk about the fact that, when one is a woman, a free woman, and I'm talking here about Islam, I guess, given my own background as an ex-Muslim and someone who was born and raised in Iran, and has lived in a theocracy, that when you are a free woman, it is actually an act of blasphemy. And in a sense, when it comes to the question of women's liberation, blasphemy is really key to that liberation. And I guess that's something I'd like us to talk about and think about a bit more, because oftentimes when we talk about blasphemy, it seemed to be something that people don't need to do, that you're causing unnecessary offense, that you are trying to provoke, you're trying to hurt a minority community, supposedly. Whereas in fact, the very fact of one living a free life is the same as committing blasphemy against Islam. And I think all Abrahamic religions, more or less here and there, depending on their access to power at any given time. And that's why I think, in fact, we need to start looking at blasphemy in a completely different way, as something that's key to our liberation, as opposed to something that's seen through the eyes of the religious right, which is hurting sentiments, which is provoking. In fact, it's key for liberation. But maybe before even talking about that, I think there's some important points to be made about the whole issue of blasphemy. And I think, just a few key points is that, one, that obviously not everyone in any given community, society, family thinks alike. And when there is this view that, oh, this is the Muslim view, or this is the Christian or Catholic view, or this is the Jewish view, or the Hindu view, these are really the views that are imposed by those in power, and that clearly there's a lot more differences of opinion even amongst believers. Also, I think another point is that everyone has been blasphemous at a given time, a period of their life. Even the most pious have been blasphemous against another religion, one that they find irrelevant or inferior to their own beliefs. And I also think that if we look at the concept of blasphemy, some acts of blasphemy are seen to be devotional and, acts of love of one's religion. For example, when Islamists denigrate Ahmadiyas or Baha'is or ex-Muslims, it seemed to be an act of devotion for them to do that. Other times, acts of blasphemy can be punished by death, as we know in over a dozen countries under Islamic rule. And I guess the point I want to make here is that why it is punishable by death has a lot to do with assertions of power and control, rather than any real hurt feelings or sentiments and so on and so forth. So I think a lot of that is a smokescreen in order to impose blasphemy laws in ways that make it more palatable, so by accusations of Islamophobia or hurt sentiments and feelings, it makes it more easy for the religious right to silence dissenters. And I think right now, just in these past few days, as we speak, there's a great case in point of this, and it's the film, A Lady of Heaven. And I'm sure you've all heard about it. It's a film that's been shown in a couple of cinemas in Britain, Islamists have gone and protested in front of the cinemas, and the film has been shut down. And of course, as usual, the herds of Islamists that converge on any given place. There's a lot of threats and intimidations involved when they do come. People feeling afraid to enter the cinema. Even when you look at the reason why the cinemas withdrew the film, it's because they were worried about the safety and security of their staff. So, the usual things that they do. But what's interesting here is they have also accused the film of being blasphemous and being anti-Muslim. And what's interesting is the film was actually made by a Shia Muslim, so not a non-believer or kafir like myself, but a Shia Muslim who is giving a view of Islam from the Shia perspective. And so, there's a digital image of Muhammad in the film. And again, in Shiism, there are portrayals of Muhammad. So my point here is, again, it's not about what all Muslims think. There isn't this blanket thing. There are different sects as well that have differences of opinion. And this very action shows that this is not just against Charlie Hebdo or against the ex-Muslims or against the free thinkers, but even other sects of Islam, other Muslims who are not conforming when we're talking about people who have access to power. So in Iran, it's a Shia theocracy. They'll do the same to Sunnis. Here you have the Sunnis who are the Islamists who have more access to power. They're trying to shut down a Shia film. And a lot of people have gone back into this conversation of, well, it's blasphemous. Why should people unnecessarily provoke Muslims, without looking at the fact that it's another Muslim Shia who has made this film. Again, they're promoting their own Islamist agenda as well. But I think all of this shows that it is much more than a question of offense and Islamophobia and all of that, which we often hear about. And I think that is important. Kenan Malik, who's a British Indian writer, just did an op-ed in The Observer about it. Or was it The Guardian? Sorry, Commentary Guardian. Thank you.
He writes in, it's listed as Guardian, but he Guardian, for The Observer.
Observer, right. So the whole title of it is that it's the gatekeepers saying that their boss, that's what this is all about. And I think that's what I'm alluding to too when I talk about the question of it being a matter of power, for them to show whose rules matter. And that's why we know that whenever the Islamists have come into a country, that very much the local dress, culture, everything has changed and been subservient to this sort of all-encompassing black and the sort of the harsh rules that were not necessarily in place before they came, even though the population was so-called Muslim. So I think that's one really important thing about blasphemy, that it is about power, it is about control. And now, I wanted to talk about women. And I think when we look, from my experience in Iran, and I think if you look at the experience of any country where there is the rise of the Islamist movement, but I think you can also see this in countries with the rise of the Hindu right in India, for example, or the Christian right in the United States, the Jewish right in the Palestinian territories. You do see that there is this obsession with women and this focus and targeting of women. And I think partly it's because women are soft targets. They always come for what's easiest first, and then they come after everybody else. And I think there's also this idea that women are often seen to be extensions of the family, of the society, the national pride and identity. And so it is important for women to be under control. And I think with women too, they are the most visible manifestations of their control. Do you know what I mean? If women are veiled, yes, we are in power. It's very clear who's in charge here. If women are segregated, it's very visible. Like the racial apartheid of South Africa, it's sex apartheid in countries under Islamic law. So I think they have this focus on women. They do come for women first. And you can see even in a country like the UK, where they have Sharia courts, for example, and we have a campaign called One Law for All against the Sharia courts. The point that the Sharia courts make are, well, what's the big fuss? We're just dealing with issues in the family, it's private. And again, our argument is that, in fact, that's what they do in all the countries that they come in. They come first. They don't start amputating limbs and stoning people and hanging people from cranes from day one. They start with denying women rights in the family, because it's step-by-step process. Women come first. And even here, the argument we make is denying women rights in the family is one of the pillars of women's oppression in countries under Islamic rule, because it encompasses so much of women's rights. There's so much discrimination in family Sharia law. Everything from women's right to divorce. Women don't have a unilateral right to divorce, men do. Women have very few reasons in which they can get the right to divorce. Child custody goes to the father at the preset age, irrespective of the welfare of the child. Marital rape is not considered a crime. In fact, one of the Sharia judges in this country said that calling rape in marriage a rape is the act of aggression, not the marital rape itself, because husbands are supposed to be able to have sex with their wives whenever they want. Child marriages, the Sharia courts here, everywhere in the countries under Islamic law, they'll say that they don't do child marriages, but that's because after puberty, you're considered a woman. So it's, again, playing with language and linguistics in order to carry on very much with what they want to do. And I think if you want to live as a free woman, and I say this in the most basic way, in the sense of, if you want to dress as you want, if you want to marry who you want, if you want to work without your husband's or father's permission, in Iran, for example, your employer requires written permission from your male guardian in order for you to work. If you want to travel, you need permission from your male guardian in order to travel. If you want to study, let's say you want to do archaeology or engineering, you're not allowed in Iran. If you want to become a judge, you can't become a judge in Iran, or you can't be president, because women are too emotional. Why? And that is exactly why you need two women as witnesses for every man witness, because they need both of them in order to manage to be relatively sane enough to make a decision. They can't make a decision on their own. I think that's the view of women, why there needs to be gender segregation, this idea that women need to be kept separate in order to ensure the stability of a society. So if you do any of these things, if you want to go to a football match, if you want to walk hand in hand with your boyfriend, if you want to go into engineering, become a judge, become president, work, travel, all of these, you are in a sense blaspheming, because you are going against the natural order of things from their perspective, what it is to be a woman. And if you look at women in religion and in Islam in particular, God is a man, the male is default. Women really are perversions of men, and therefore the ideal woman is one that does as she's told, does as her male guardian requires, her male relatives require. And any transgression is an act of blasphemy. And I think, from my perspective, I think it's important to look at it this way. That's why women who transgress are seen to be dangerous. The Iranian government's called me a harlot, corrupt, immoral. TEDx has called me dangerous, and I could, I don't know, Warwick University Student Union has said that I'm inflammatory and inciting this and that. Again, the danger of a woman who doesn't know her place and does as she chooses. And I think that is a huge act of blasphemy. And I think we need to start looking at that. And, this understanding that actually, if we want to fully liberate ourselves, the very act of liberation is an act of blasphemy. And that's why blasphemy is not something that needs to be looked down upon, or or explained, oh, I did try to provoke you. I'm really sorry you want to cut my head off now because I said something about your religion. I'm so sorry you're upset and your fragile feelings are hurt. I'm so sorry, you think I'm attacked. This whole time we're explaining that it's not Islamophobia. Islam is an idea. It has to be open to criticism. That's not the same as attacking Muslims. Blasphemy is a right. It's part of freedom of conscience and expression. I think, it's important also for us to go on the offensive and say blasphemy not only is a right, not only is part of freedom of conscience and expression, but it is key for our liberation, because to be a free woman, to be a free human being, I have to be blasphemous. I have to commit blasphemy in everything that I do. So I'm going to stop there and just open it up to any comments, questions people might have. And a lot of the issues that Nina had raised, I think, are issues that are often on our minds as well. And I'd be happy to, contribute if I can.
I'll be looking at the chat and the Q&A. I have a couple of comments I would like to make. At the very beginning, you mentioned how in these countries, in these religions, the women are the easy target. And I would say that they are, but also they're a very high target. And I think we are a very high target. And I think that's why we are being targeted, because if the woman is put under control, then anything else can be put under control, because it's the reproduction, the sexuality, freedom of expression of a woman and her thoughts and feelings and what she wants to do with her life. And anything is up for control. And then you mentioned how obviously Islam and any religion should be debated, discussed, challenged, because it is an idea. And I think obviously with previous activism, specifically in the humanist community, and among all of you, it's the fact that some people really take in these ideas as to be themselves. And I think that's what makes it so difficult to discuss it person to person, because when you say that you are criticizing a religion, what that person takes it as is that they are being criticized and it is their own selfhood. And it's really difficult to navigate that, but I will put in the chat, there is a...
Can I just come back to that issue? I think you made some really good points. I think on this final issue, I do want to say that, look, all of us feel very strongly about our beliefs. And we do see, when we see misogyny, it does feel like an attack on us as a person as well. So I think we all have deeply held beliefs. I think the difference is that because of the violence and intimidation that comes with the Islamist movement, in this instance, of course, there are other religious right movements that do that too. It does become impossible to have debates and discussions without, fear for one's life to a large extent. And I think that this, again, what the Islamist movement has done is to give the impression that for all Muslims, these issues are such a matter of life and death that they are willing to kill for it. But that's not true. That's not true. And I think, again, we need to make a distinction between Muslims and Islamists in the same way that we would make a distinction between the English and the English Defense League, which is a fascist group, or between, the Buddhist right and just regular Buddhists, or the Buddhist right who are attacking Muslims, or the Hindu right attacking Muslims, just regular people who are Hindus. My parents are Muslim and they don't want me dead. They didn't go and burn a book. My dad doesn't like Salman Rushdie. He hasn't read his book. He just thinks it's anti-Muslim. He hasn't gone and burnt Salman Rushdie's book or effigy, or gone in front of an embassy and burned flags. Well, he's offended, as I am offended very often. To be frank, I'm offended all the time because I'm an activist as well. A lot of things offend me, and a lot of it comes from religious ideas and religious texts and religious parasitical imams and theocracies. But somehow you and I are seen to be capable of having a discussion without cutting anyone's head off.
Yes.
But for them, there's always this excuse, well, it seems as if it's so much part of them that they can't take it. Well, no, I can't take it either. And most Muslims honestly can take it too. They hear, in fact, if you look at countries under Islamic law, look at Iran, the mullahs, the clergy in that country who are in parliament, come late to parliamentary hearings on TV, and they say that no taxi would pick them up because they were wearing their Islamic robe. They had to go home and change and come back out in order to be able to get to the parliament on time. Mullahs are always complaining about the fact that they need to take off their clothes because there's so much hatred against them. There are jokes about Muhammad in Iran, about Khamenei. There is an anti-Islamic backlash in that country. In Persian Twitter, Islam is shit was trending, So it is not true that it means so much to them that they, because in a sense, it's this sort of racism of lower expectations. It's also looking at things through the lens of the Islamists. And I think that's what we need to make sure that we don't do. If I can handle misogyny in your Bible and your Quran and your whatever other Torah and so on and so forth, and listen to this crap every single day, walk past a mosque that makes me ill, but still I can recognize the right that people have a right to go to a mosque and they have a right to their religion. Well, I'm pretty sure you can manage it too, and I think, again, it's not giving people the permission to behave badly, because we have for so many years been able to have discussions. I mean, I come from a family where my grandfather was a clergyman. I have very religious people in my family, and I have atheists and secularists in my family. And when we lived in Iran, before the Islamic regime, it was a dictatorship too, we had some family members fasting, others not fasting. We used to eat in front of each other. Well, if you're fasting, that's your problem. We're still eating. Whereas now, even if you go into a shop in a Muslim area, they want to know why you're buying food. Aren't you Muslim? Well, your name is Maryam. You're not fasting. It's this idea that, now it is the religious rights, culture, and beliefs has been superimposed on everybody. And I think we need to see that in order to be able to defend people and the right to religion, but making sure that we're always standing up to the religious right. And I mean, I guess the point too is, if you are offended, who gives a shit? It's fine. You're offended. I'm offended. We're all offended. It's fine. We can still manage to live with each other. We all have family members who have different politics from us, don't we? That have different religions from us. I mean, in my family, we've got Christians, we've got Hindus, we've got Muslims, we've got Shia Muslims, Sunni Muslim. We manage. I hate to see some people at my family gatherings. I think they're like, stooges of the Iranian government, and they think I'm some sort of kafir that's going to take the whole family to hell. But we still somehow manage not to kill each other. And I think that that's the reality for most people.
The first victims of Islamism are the Muslims themselves, for example, in Iran. And so they were the first victims of the mullah regime. And so we should also keep in mind that not everybody in Iran is for the political Islam, and they are also victims. And there are some are fighting against it, like women.
Yeah, another thing that came to my mind as you were speaking, Maryam, was the very concept of Islamophobia, or the phobia part. And I remembered there's a linguist here in Oxford, and she's a very famous feminist as well, Deborah Cameron. And if I could just read 3 lines of something that she wrote about minding our language and the difference from isms and phobias. I think this is really interesting with religions as well. So she says, words ending in ism most commonly denote systems of ideas or beliefs, political, religious, intellectual, or artistic. Terms like sexism and racism were also intended by the radicals who coined them to refer to systems, organized social systems of dominance and subordination. Though they are often used now to mean just prejudice or discrimination based on sex/race, that is a liberal watering down of their original meaning. In the radical framework, prejudice is not the cause of systemic oppression, but the consequence or byproduct of it. And now she says, words ending in phobia, by contrast, most commonly denote clinical conditions. In everyday parlance, the term is used more loosely. It retains the sense of a pathological overreaction, but there is less emphasis on uncontrollable anxiety, the main symptom of clinical phobia, and more emphasis on the idea of aversion or hatred. So I think it's really also important to see how recent these terms are and how sometimes meaningless. If we're just talking about prejudice and interpersonal prejudice, then it is not the same as systems of oppression, which relate to sexism and how women are treated across the world.
Yeah, I mean, definitely that's a hugely important point, but also I think that again, the whole term Islamophobia is a way of bringing in blasphemy laws through the back door in a sense, because there is this equation of criticism of Islam as being the same as an attack on the Muslim minority or community. And again, Muslims are not a minority in many places. There is an Islamist movement, even in countries where they are minorities. So, for example, in Britain, it's a stronghold of the Islamist movement here. In fact, if you recall the murder of Avijit Roy, the Bangladeshi writer, who was murdered at a book fair in Bangladesh, and his wife, Bona Ahmad, was attacked as well. And she lost a finger, and she was attacked atrociously as well, but she survived. The actual order for his murder was given by an Islamist in Britain. So it is, it's sort of like the Christian right. It is an international movement. There are links between the European far right and the American one and the Australian one. They have these links, they work together. Even if they have differences, they strengthen each other. And it's the same with Islamism. So even though Britain, for example, is not an Islamic state, obviously, it isn't a secular state. It's, the Church of England is the established church. The Queen is the head of the established church. There are bishops in the House of Lords. There are prayers in Parliament. But it's a very secular society. But even in Britain, for example, it is very difficult to be able to criticize, particularly Islam, because it's seen to be an attack on a minority group, whereas in fact, criticizing a belief is not the same as attacking people. And I think the term Islamophobia has been used as a way of conflating criticism with harm. And we see that a lot, where as if you say something, it often is equated with actual physical harm. And that's not the case. And I think we need to, be able to say whatever we think, as long as we're not inciting violence. I think that should be the line. But we should be able to say even the most unpalatable things, because the only way to challenge the unpalatable is by arguments that will persuade people one way or the other. That's all we have basically unless you want to be part of a violent movement that forces people. It's about speaking and arguing and trying to change points of view. And I think Islamophobia can be quite dangerous by preventing people from criticizing Islam. But again, that's not to say that there isn't racism, systematic, but also individual prejudices against minorities, Muslims, migrants. We see it all the time.
I agree. We do have one question in the Q&A that goes, thank you for this introduction and for the fight so far. I would like you, if you feel good about it, to share with us the pressures you have faced in your fight. How do women who are believers react to your activism? Have you had conflicts with them too? Also, universities and gender studies now offer Islamic feminism as another legitimate ism. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, I think obviously there are believers that I work with and who are supportive of the work that I do. They're secularists themselves. They believe in the right to the right for people to be able to leave Islam, to criticize Islam. And just as you have Christians who are secularists as well. And I think there is this idea that, and it does a disservice to real life human beings, because the image of Muslims is basically that which, that of the Islamist, you know, and in fact, it's not the case. If you look at movements, liberation movements in many countries in the Middle East, North Africa, and South Asia, many of them women-led, in fact. Iran is a great case in point. The women in Afghanistan standing up against the Taliban. I mean, can you imagine the courage to do that, honestly? You know, with Taliban facing their guns to them while they protest for girls' education and for women's rights. In Iraq, there's a very strong secular movement, for example. The same in Iran. There's actually an anti-Islamic backlash in Iran. So there are lots of people who are Muslims who defend the right to criticize and to question and to doubt, because, look, the reality is that even if you are a believer, you're not the same believer as ISIS or Taliban or the Iranian regime. And I think that's very clear, because there are lots of Christians who are pro-choice. They don't want Roe v. Wade to be overturned in the US, for example. It doesn't mean that because you're a Christian, you are automatically anti-abortion, for example. Do you know what I mean? It's because people are much more complex than that. First of all, religion is something that you're often born into because of the lottery of birth, you know, depending on where you're born, in what family you're born, that's the religion that you're given. And a lot of people don't necessarily take their religion seriously. It's only the Islamists and the religious right that take it so seriously and want everybody to abide by their rules. And you know, the fact of the matter is, if you look at the huge numbers of refugees fleeing Islamist states, for example, where are they all coming to? They're not going to Saudi Arabia. They're coming to Europe. They're coming to the West, because it is a dream for people who live in theocracies to be able to live in more secular societies. You know, so I think for a lot of believing people, secularism is the answer. I mean, I know that to be the case for all the believers in my family, mostly. You know, and I think because it is a matter of life and death. Look, if you're a young person, and we have very young populations, like in Iran, 70% are under the age of 30. You want to listen to music, it's Islamically prohibited. You want to hold hands with your girlfriend, it's Islamically prohibited. You want to have sex outside of marriage, it's Islamically prohibited. You want to go to a football match and you're a girl, it's Islamically prohibited. You don't want to wear the veil, it's Islamically prohibited. Not everything you want to do is Islamically prohibited. So there is a natural conflict, you know, that happens because you want to breathe, you know, and that was my whole point about the fact that, you know, being a free person means that you are a blasphemer, and we need to look at it in that way as well. On Islamic feminism, I mean, again, let me preface it by saying I know many Muslim women who are feminists, and men as well who are feminists, because for them religion is something they were born into, but they live with 21st century values. They believe in equality. They believe in women's rights. But Islamic feminism is an impossibility. It's an oxymoron. Islam and feminism, Christianity and feminism Judaism and feminism, Hinduism and feminism, they are antithetical to each other. And I think the job of Islamic feminists, if you even look at them in a very brief way, look at their arguments, it's not to defend women or to defend feminism. It is a way of defending Islam and, under the cover of this. So, they look at the surah and the Quran that says women who are disobedient can be beaten. And their feminist interpretation is that the woman should be beaten with a toothbrush. So it's not going to cause too much harm. She's just beaten by a toothbrush. But the point of feminism is that women shouldn't be beaten at all. And that women, domestic violence is a crime. So when, I think you need to choose. And again, it goes back to my argument about blasphemy too. If you want to be free, you have to be a blasphemer. And if you want to be a feminist, it is outside of the framework of religion. It is impossible to defend women's rights in a religious context because religion is fundamentally misogynist and patriarchal, and God is man, man is made in God's image, and woman is a perversion really of God and man.
That was very well said, I would say. And as far as one of the things that I mentioned early on as to what you will discuss with us, the relationship between some of the defenders of Islam, not just Muslims, but defenders on the left, and those who are actually trying to suppress blasphemy and say how in some cases, if not all cases, it will cause eruptions and divisions in the wider society, and that simply because we cannot control the consequences of the speech and the blasphemy and what it will do to the ordinary Muslim people, they say that we shouldn't be exercising blasphemy. What has been your experience in discussing those issues?
I do want to say that I'm very much on the left myself. I'm a worker communist. And so I find it quite funny. Obviously there is a section of the left that is pro-Islamist. That's very clear. But there's lots of right-wing governments that are whining and dining Islamic states. Somehow that never comes on the radar. It's always the left, and usually these groups are so marginal, honestly, not all of them, but what I mean is when you look at power sources, the British government, the US government, what are some of its key allies? The Saudi regime. Iranian government kills 1,500 people in 3 days during the November uprising. They're still having discussions with it. For goodness sake, Iran takes hostages of their own citizens and they don't really give too much of a care about it, So what I'm trying to say is that it is both the right and the left that support the Islamists. I think the right in particular because they are in power. And so it has much more widespread effect and damage that it does. If you look at Saudi Arabia and the amount of money and arms and training that Western governments have given that regime to kill and murder its own citizens, enough said, and then all we hear about are left, the left and what they do. And fine, I'm opposed to that left as well. But what I mean is there seems to be an imbalance because it's never a question about the right. And also, whenever you talk about Islam, it's like, it's the far right. They're the only ones who are talking about Islam. No, they're not the only ones talking about Islam. They're talking about Islam because they hate Muslims, they hate immigrants. That's their excuse so they can get rid of all of us. The sooner they see the back of all of us, they'll be happy. Those of us who come from that region, those of us who are from the diaspora, or people who are free thinkers and women's rights activists and so on and so forth, we're criticizing religion and Islam because we want to defend women's rights. And I think that's fundamentally the difference. Now on this left, I mean, I have many experiences with this left, because I have been, I have called it a politics of betrayal. You know, it is a betrayal of left principles, because the left has historically been a banner carrier of anti-clericalism, anti-religion, free thought, women's rights, gay rights. It is the left that has done it. And this is such a betrayal of those principles for this left to defend the Islamists. And I think, you know, it would be, if you want to be nice and say, well, you know, it's very nice of people to want to not be racist. And I think that's a wonderful thing. That's a product of the anti-racist movement. It's a product of, you know, all these years of fighting for an end to, you know, racism and discrimination and so on and so forth. But I think when you look at this left, actually, they have an affinity with the Islamist movement. So they shouldn't really be called left at all. They do see Islamism as a revolutionary force against US and Western imperialism. And what's interesting is that Islamism is actually a force of imperialism in the region that it rules. You know, it has eradicated local dress, local culture, local practices, and imposed its Black dress and its brutal laws. It's, you know, Somalia, that rich music, it has destroyed that music. It has destroyed, you know, the first thing they do, the Taliban, the Iranian regime, women's voices are banned. You know, some of our great women singers in Iran, we don't have anymore, you know, because they have made women's voices haram. And so it's not really a revolutionary force, it's a counter-revolutionary force. But for this anti-imperialist left, whose brains are kind of, I guess, rotted from the inside, and they're not quite able to think anymore. Because if you look at this movement, you can see what an anti-revolutionary and counter-revolutionary force it is. In Iran, for example, workers are flogged for celebrating 1st of May, International Workers' Day. It's an anti-working class movement. And also, if you look at contemporary history of the Islamist movement, it was brought to center stage by US foreign policy. Because if you remember, during the Cold War, it was the US that trained the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, because they wanted to create a green belt, an Islamic belt around the Soviet Union at the time. So it was part of US foreign policy to bring the Islamists to center stage as a bulwark against communism. And even if you look at the history of Iran, the Iranian revolution was not an Islamic revolution, because you can tell if something is an Islamic movement because of their slogans, because of their demands. The demand of the Iranian revolution was not Sharia law, were not Sharia courts, were not the veil. Those were not the demands of the revolution. It was an end to dictatorship, freedom, and there was 2 years of freedom until the Islamic regime took complete power. But during that time, in fact, there's so many things. Like if you look at where Khomeini was, he was taken from Iraq, where he had no access to the media, and brought to Paris, where he had the world's media at his attention. And I don't know if you've heard of the Guadeloupe conference, but it's now in the public arena. This is information that has all come out because the period has passed, and now it's now, you know, secret documents are now available to the public because of the passing of time. There was a conference in Guadeloupe where they decided that they prefer an Islamic state in Iran because it was a continuation of their foreign policy of creating a bulwark against the Soviet Union at the time. So what I want to say is the anti-imperialist left is so anti-imperialist that they're actually supporting a movement that was brought to center stage by the imperialists. I mean, it's absurd. I mean, the absurdity of it is beyond explanation. But again, I think it's because they have this affinity. Their anti-imperialism is, you know, is all that they see, and they don't see all the relationships that these Islamic movements have with various imperialist powers. You know, anyway, it's a long history, but what I want to say is that it's not a lot of the movements against Sharia for women's rights are taking place by left activists. So I think we always have to make that distinction, that it is a section of the left, and also that it is right-wing governments that are keeping those movements in power, because in Iran, the protests are so intense that if that government did not have backing, it would not be able to withstand those protests that have been going on continuously over so many years. So I think it's important to see it within that bigger context.
Why we are mentioning the left is that probably many of us are also left, and that we feel as women, we feel betrayed by the left.
Yeah.
And this is the problem. For, far right, we know what they think about us, and many left, especially men, betrayed us women. And for example, also something that I saw in Germany, if you want to show diversity, you have always a veiled woman in the picture, or even a veiled girl. This is something, this is diversity. This is tolerance.
Yeah. I mean, I think I understand. Again, let me just say, this is something that has hurt for very many years. So it's not as if it's there. I completely understand. I mean, the student unions that said I'm inflammatory and inciting hatred against Muslims, they were left student unions. The ones when at Goldsmiths University, Islamists came, they threatened people in the audience. They tried to shut down my talk. It was videotaped only because the student union wanted evidence of what I say to hold it against me afterwards. And when that video showed what the head of the Islamic Society and others were doing, the student union wrote to me, not apologizing for what happened to me at that university, but telling me to remove that video because of privacy issues. And again, YouTube said that it wasn't a privacy issue because there was no name of any students there. It was a public event. And, the LGBTQ plus society, the feminist society, sided with the Islamic Society against me. They said they're such lovely boys, and I'm an Islamophobe that's come to incite hatred. So I know, I was at a rally. I had organized a rally against, I think it was in defense of French secularism in front of the French embassy, I think. And Al-Muhajirun had come to do a counter demonstration against us, and the EDL had come to do a counter demonstration. And all these young people from Unite Against Fascism started marching. And I got so excited. I was like, Unite Against Fascism, they're joining us. They're coming to join us because, I came to this country in 2000 and I was clueless about what the hell was going on. And they joined Al-Muhajirun. And I, just thinking of it right now makes me want to cry. But it's just so upsetting. Yes. But again, the thing that I keep saying is like, look, all the people who are fighting with me, they're on the left. All the people who are putting their life, the majority are on the left. Look, it's not, it's like when we were at Gay Pride and we had Allah is gay and fuck Islamism and Islamic homophobia and racism. Some people on the left had shown a picture of it and said, as well as the Islamists, oh, look, here, the far right. Well, the Nazis don't march for gay rights. Do you know what I mean? They're not for gay rights. They're not for women's rights. So that alone shows that those who are fighting this fight are, very much on the left. And so I think that's why, for me, I feel like we need to also defend the left. Do you know what I mean?
Of course.
It's, criticize.
We are the left.
Exactly. And that's the thing. We are the real left. They cannot, if you are defending the Islamist movement, if you are defending the Iranian regime that flogs workers who celebrate International Workers' Day, who, assassinates free thinkers, who disappears, activists, you are not on the left. And I think that's something that we also need to go on the offensive of, because I feel a bit fed up of having to defend the left when we're doing all the fucking hard work as well. Do you know what I mean? We're the ones who are risking our lives. We're on the front lines, and we not anything compared to what people are doing in the Middle East and North Africa and South Asia. We're just extensions of them, but we're refugees because of the sort of the situation. And still, you know, we keep hearing about how awful this left is. Well, no, I'm the left, you're the left, you know, and I think it's important for us to always make that clear as well when we're having this discussion.
I think one of the reasons that we sometimes do focus on that is simply because it's like an internal division. We do recognize them as somewhat aligned with us, the kind of the non-revolutionary left, but I think it's important to
they're not, are
how
they?
It is. No,
they're not aligned with us. I think
as you were speaking, I kind of thought of the fact that they define themselves and they position themselves as the anti-right. So they do anything and everything in opposition to what they see the right is doing. So if the right is also against Islamist groups, then they will be for those groups. So they don't think of themselves as independent and revolutionary. They only think of themselves as in relation to the right.
Yeah, but I think actually it's more even than that. They have an affinity with the Islamist movement. So, for example, I was involved in the Stop the War coalition initially, and I even had given myself to stand for the committee. But, you know, when we were at the initial meetings, they condemned the US and they didn't want to condemn the attack on the World Trade Centers. I mean, how can you not, like, innocent people died? How can you not condemn that? Or I went to meetings where women and men were segregated out of respect. Well, do you know what segregation means? It means that if we mix with men, we're the source of fitna and chaos. As the head of the Muslim Association Britain, who I had a debate with on Sharia law in the Houses of Parliament, said, look, we need gender segregation, because if you have mixing, then there's going to be adultery, we're going to need to stone people to death. So isn't it better that we just stop the mixing in the first place? Like, that's the thinking behind it. And then, you know, or I went to a rally where they said against the Iraq War. I mean, I was arrested against the first Iraq War in the US. I was beaten really badly. I was charged with up to 13 years in prison if it had gone through. And police basically said that those of us protesters, we attacked the coming home parade of the soldiers. And luckily, there was one journalist that had taken footage that showed them actually pulling me over the barricade, stamping on my feet, jumping on my stomach, kicking me in the face. If that wasn't there, I could have been in prison for 13 years for obstructing justice and blah, 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 and causing a riot and this and that. So, you know, yes, I'm also anti-war, but I couldn't go to the anti-war protest this time around because they were telling women to veil in solidarity with Iraqi women, you know, women who are getting acid thrown in their faces because they don't want to be veiled. And you're telling people here in Britain to veil in solidarity with women there. It's just heartbreaking and outrageous and frustrating. And, you know, it angers me so much because if anywhere, that's my place, not theirs, you know. But they've taken over. They've taken over the Stop the War coalition. And there's so many examples of this. I can't even begin to tell you how frustrating and disappointing it is. But I keep telling myself, you know, we are the majority, you know, those of us fighting on the front lines. We are the true voice of the left. We are the majority, not those who are, you know, imposing Sharia laws that Stop the War coalition meetings. I mean, for goodness sakes, I mean, how outrageous can you get, you know? So, but I just wanted to say something else about, Nina, you had mentioned that people say, well, you know, in your first talk about how some of these people are saying, well, you know, freedom of expression, we have to be careful because what about this minority community that may be under attack? But I guess to them, I always say that, how dare you? Do you think that freedom of expression is only for you? What about us? You know, what else do we have? I mean, if we don't want to kill people, if we don't want to be jihadis or part of some fascist group that beats up and burns down asylum centers, if we want to defend rights from, you know, a human standpoint while defending human beings and holding humanity sacred, nothing else, what else do we have except for our freedom of expression? And you're trying to limit it. It's not your, that's not your place. It's my freedom of expression. I'll use it the way I want. You're not going to tell me how to use it. You don't like what I say. Well, I don't like the fact that you don't say anything, or that you're siding with the Islamists. How come you can say, you can do all of that, you know, but because even by your silence, you're de facto giving power to those who are oppressing women. And yet we're not allowed to say anything. It's too much. It's, you know, you're going too far. I'm going too far. I'm just speaking. The person who's cutting off people's head is going too far. The person who bombs and kills, bombs Charlie Hebdo's offices or murders cartoonists, they're going too far. They're provoking me. I'm not provoking them. They're provoking us. They're, you know, when they say, if you speak, we'll have to kill you because you're a kafir, they're provoking me. Do you know what I mean? It's not the other way around. And so what else can I do? I have nothing else. And they want to take that away from us as well. It's impossible. We won't do it. Do you know what I mean? That's it. We're not doing it.
Yeah, that's very clear, because you always need to point at the source of provocation, at the source of violence, and not make yourself a useful deflection that they're trying to make you.
Yeah.
Maryam, I wanted to ask you also one question. You know, I'm coming from Bosnia, and I don't know if you know the situation in Bosnia now in the Balkans, where the Islamism is also growing. And for example, many women are wheeled, and I see also I see also the influence from the Turkey, many refugees from the Balkan War in the 90s, Muslims, they also had their problems with if you want help from us, for example, from the Muslim organization, you have to wear a headscarf.
Yes, I mean, it is, I think, look, the reality is that the world is very different than it was 50 years ago. And I think it's thanks in large part to the rise of the Islamist movement. And I think especially because this contemporary movement came off the back of a people's revolution. It was perceived to come off the back of a people's revolution. In fact, the Islamist movement suppressed the Iranian revolution, but because it's perceived, you know, I don't know, the saying, the victor writes history, doesn't it? And so it's very often now spoken as an Islamic revolution, whereas it was not an Islamic revolution. And so that's had a knock-on effect in various societies. It's like a domino effect. It has helped to bring about Islamist movements in various other countries, strengthen them, whether it's in Bosnia, whether it's in the UK, whether it's in, you know, Algeria, Tunisia, you name it. And of course, it's had a knock-on effect on other fundamentalist movements as well. The rise of the Christian right, the rise of the Hindu right, you know, all of that I think is linked because they do strengthen each other. They are fundamentally one movement. And I guess it's kind of, you know, like if there's a, you know, if there's a center of feminism in a war zone like Rojava, it strengthens our feminist movement here. It's the same for them. And I think that the reality is that it has strengthened that movement. But I think that's why for us, it's so important to make these distinctions, that people are not necessarily Islamists, and that people oftentimes are forced to do things because of poverty, because of intimidation, because of pressure. You know, we have many ex-Muslim members who are veiled, who go to the mosque, who fast during Ramadan because they have to put on that face, you know, and people are not necessarily what they seem. I always say that. And I think that especially if they're living in situations that make them vulnerable, they are especially not what they seem, you know, and people lead double, triple lives often. And that's why you really can't know what people think, because there's a danger to knowing what they think as well. And so I think, you know, it's important for us to very strongly combat Islamism. And with that, we have to be able to criticize and question and doubt, you know, Islam as well, particularly because it's the banner of the Islamist movement. We have no choice but to do it. But at the same time, we have to have this sort of unequivocal defense of Muslims and people and citizens, irrespective of their beliefs. You know, I think that's so important. So for me, I feel like it is a fight on many different fronts. You know, I explain that to my comrades, you know, Iranian comrades. You can't just focus on Islam and the Islamic regime here. It's different in Iran, you know, but here you have also to think about the far right. You also have to think about not feeding into racism. Of course, it's not fair. It's not fair. But if you want to fight humanely and for a better world, you know, you've got to fight. The fight matters too. How you fight matters too. Do you know what I mean? And that always, you know, keeping people's dignity. So for me, I'm pro-refugee rights. I'm pro-open borders. People think that's a contradiction, but it's not, because it's important to, you know, if you're fighting for people's rights, you know, you know, especially a lot of these people who keep saying, oh, these poor, you know, these Islamic countries are so awful. But then anyone who flees from them, they don't want them here. So how does that work? If it's so awful, then all these people should be allowed in here.
Yes.
You know, so it's there. So I think having a very humane politics and a politics that puts humanity at its center is key. It's not just a fight against Sharia, it's a fight for women's rights, for human rights, you know, for a better world for everybody, not just for believers, us, non-believers, for all of us. Yeah. For us, yes, and we can't, you know, I think it's very clear that you can't have it good for only one segment of society. It has to be good for everybody. And I think it's good we have to explain this to religious people as well, that it is to your benefit that we can say what we want, because you can be sure there are lots of believers who don't agree and who are worried about what they would be called if they said what they thought, you know, and we have to open that space up for them.
This is something that I also tell to the believers in Croatia, where the Catholic Church is in power. I tell them, if you want no secularism, then look how it is in Saudi Arabia or in Iran, what theocracy means. That's nice and easy to be a believer in a secular state. You can choose, you know, you can choose to go to an abortion, to make artificial insemination, to have sex before marriage, to everything. It is so, and then you are attacking us because we are criticizing the religion or criticizing the power of your religious institution. So I'm telling them, you know, we are not the problem. We are not the danger. Your churches, you also in Croatia, if they had the power, they would ban abortion. They would,
and they'll do it the minute they can. Look at Poland. I mean, look at what's happening in the US. If they can, they will. Yeah,
we are also struggling with it. They can't ban it, but they try on every. We have 60% of gynecologists in the public hospitals who are not providing abortion on religious grounds, and that's why 2 years ago, Center for Civil Courage organized a women's network, Brave Sisters, and we are helping now women to get their abortion. We are supporting them, showing them where to go, to which hospital. Nothing illegal, everything legal. and we are supporting them morally to explain them it is not a sin. There is this feminist solidarity, women's solidarity.
Yes, just a quick break. The why she pointed at me was because Nada is from Center for Civil Courage, and I'm the representative for Women's Solidarity, which is more active in Serbia, though we have some members from Croatia. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes. I think we might be wrapping it up. I think one of the main message today I took from you was from the very beginning, and it is about the acts of blasphemy and how they are important. And obviously you were speaking about the women in Iran and the women in Islamist countries and Islamist regimes. But I think it is really recognizing what is the dominant structure where every woman is, and just being blasphemous in accordance to that. And that those are liberatory acts. So yeah, that was really nice.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Maryam, for everything. And we will see each other in 2 months.
Yes.
Yes.
Looking forward to it.
Looking forward. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody who participated and listened. And we will also post this on YouTube channel. Thank you, Maryam. Thank you.
And thank both of you, as well as everyone who was here. I was very grateful to be here and happy to have this discussion.
I was also very happy. And as I said to Caroline, resist. We have to resist.
Carry on. Yeah.
Okay, carry on.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you to everyone, and see you in September with
Thank
Kaisha.
you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.